The Commander format is generally defined by value engines of various shapes and flavors, but all of which accomplish one or more of the same set of goals. Accrue cards, mana, or board presence, then leverage these advantages to overwhelm your opponents. Due to high life totals, multiple opponents, and the variance inherent to 99 card singleton decks, Commander games tend to be long and grindy. You are usually better off if you set up your own proactive game plan that doles out sparse but well-timed interaction, rather than focusing on interacting with every single thing your opponent does. As such, most decks in the format tend to fall into the archetype of mid-range, ramp hybrid decks. But mid-range and ramp are not the only way to play Magic, nor even the only way to play Commander. The other three macro archetypes in Magic, aggro, combo, and control, do show up in Commander occasionally, but many Magic the Gathering players shy away from bringing these strategies to casual Commander tables. Control especially gets a bad rap in Commander, as the archetype is notorious for its ability to prevent players from enacting their own strategies, as well as prolonging games past the point of being fun. What's more, control decks often struggle in Commander, since the traditional control strategy of a 1v1 format doesn't translate well to the multiplayer nature of Commander. But that doesn't mean you can't play Control. Control is a perfectly valid strategy in Magic, and games involving control decks are often intricate and challenging in ways that Magic does best. It just means that you have to approach playing Control a little differently in Commander than you would in a 1v1 format. This video will teach you not only how to play Control in Commander, but also how to become a better Control player in Commander as well. It will cover how to build a Control deck, as well as how to pilot your deck in-game to maximize both your deck's success rate and the overall fun had at the table. Now, of course, this video is not intended to provide hard and fast rules of any kind. At the end of the day, you can do whatever you want in a game of Commander. It's merely meant as a tool for players who want advice on how to have a good time with a control deck. We're not beginners anymore, but we're still not at the advanced level. This video is for the intermediates, and this is Tolarian Tutor, the Commander lessons. This video will teach you how to be a better control player in Commander, but what if you wanted to learn a more practical skill like how to code? Think that's impossible? No, it's actually as easy as learning how to play an RPG, thanks to today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev was designed with one simple goal: teach you how to code by using a captivating online RPG, one that you can consume at your own pace. If you can memorize Magic the Gathering cards and combos, you can learn Python and Go programming languages. Boot.dev is just an RPG-like tool to help you do so. Boot.dev is by far the most fun way to learn back-end web development skills from start to finish in the Python and Go programming languages. The folks at Boot.dev rightfully believe the best way to learn to code is to ensure you're never bored. That's why Boot.dev is online, self-paced, and feels like a captivating role-playing game. The platform gives you experience writing a ton of code because getting your hands on the keyboard and shipping projects is the only way to really learn. Boot.dev knows that learning to code is tricky, so the game introduces you to Boots, a powerful bear wizard. Boots is an AI that has been trained on each lesson and can walk you through your issues. Rather than simply giving you the answers, Boots will ask you questions designed to lead you to understanding. Socrates would be proud. Boot.dev is also risk-free. If you don't feel the lessons are helping you, Boot.dev has a 30-day no questions asked refund policy. The best part? The creators of Boot.dev believe coding shouldn't be locked behind a paywall, so all of their content is free to read and watch in guest mode. A paid membership just unlocks interactivity and the game that goes with it. So click the link in the video description box below and use my code Tolarian to get 25% off of your first payment for Boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or even your first year, depending on the subscription you choose. Thank you, Boot.dev, for sponsoring this video. Part 1: Obstacles with Control in Commander and how to overcome them. Control decks in constructed formats generally operate under the same strategy. Interact with opponents on a one-for-one basis, then refuel using powerful card advantage spells or engines. The problem with attempting to do this in Commander is your one-for-one interaction scales poorly with the multiplayer nature of the format. In a 1v1 game, you get to take half of all the turns, and half of all cards and mana at the table are yours. If you spend your mana and a card to answer your opponent's use of mana and their card, that's a net even exchange. And you get to then untap and do it again on your next turn. You will still need card advantage to then translate these even exchanges into inevitability, but you are at least starting from a level playing field. In a 4-player free-for-all game, you only take a quarter of the turns, have access to a quarter of the mana, and 75% of the cards at the table are owned by your opponents. That means one-for-one interaction is only going to be 1/3 as effective in Commander. When you counterspell an opponent's commander, for example, it doesn't impact your other 2 opponents at all. Actually, that's not even true. You interacting with one of your opponents actually helped your other 2 opponents. You spent a card and mana to interact with just 33% of your opponent's actions while helping the other 66% of your opponents in the process. The very act of interacting with a single opponent puts you behind, whereas if you had spent that mana and card on a threat of your own or some key component to your own game plan, you'd be at parity. What's more, traditional means of card advantage don't carry the same heft in Commander as they do in 1v1. If your cards scale poorly in Commander, then drawing multiple of those cards also scales poorly to Commander. And that's just with raw card draw spells. Planeswalker-based card advantage engines are significantly worse in a format where multiple players can threaten them. Now, don't get me wrong, none of this means interaction and card advantage are bad in Commander. In fact, you yourself might be thinking, but Professor, aren't cards like Swords to Plowshares, Swan Song, and Beast Within still good in Commander? And you'd be right. These cards are premium interaction in the Commander format. The key here is that most decks that run these cards aren't doing so as part of their game plan. They are cards designed to protect your game plan by preventing an opponent from winning before you can pull off a win yourself. The card disadvantage of this interaction is accounted for by the strength and value provided by your plan. You might see where I'm going with this. The key to a successful control deck in Commander is building around a coherent game plan that leads to you winning not through attrition as you would in 1v1, but rather through inevitability. You will rarely run your opponents out of cards in Commander, but you can reach a point where you have access to so many cards that you will win eventually, as control players love to do, with your Sarah Angel or equivalent win condition, whatever it may be. It just means you have to be more conscious with how you spend your cards and how you recoup those cards once they're gone. You also want to consider different kinds of cards than you might be used to when building your Commander deck. Part 2, building your deck. The first thing to do when building a control deck for Commander is, well, to pick a commander. If you're new either to Control or to playing Control in Commander, you might find yourself gravitating toward a commander that keeps you alive, like Alluro, Ageless Aesthetic, or single-handedly puts the screws to your opponents, like Grand Arbiter Augustine IV, or send triplets. You are welcome to run these commanders if you'd like, but you should know that both these kinds of commanders tend to make you a target immediately. Alluro threatens to gain you so much life over the course of the game that your opponents will feel obligated to send every spare creature they have at you. What's worse, because you can benefit from him without ever casting him, your opponents might feel your deck doesn't keep with the spirit of the Commander format. Augustine or send triplets, on the other hand, will put a target on your back in another way. Players don't generally like the constant disruption to their game plan that Augustine doles out, nor do they like losing their precious cards in hand to send triplets. You will likely struggle to keep these commanders in play for very long, and that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that the table decides the game will be more fun for everyone without you in it, and you are then met with a very early exit. Instead, I recommend choosing a commander that can advance your game plan without necessarily actively or constantly hindering your opponents. I know, you want to hinder your opponents. That's why you play Control. But the key to playing Control and Commander is knowing when to pick your battles. More on that in a moment. There are many good options for commanders that meet this criteria. You could play a commander with built-in card advantage like Rashmi, Tasigur, or Niv Mizzet. Or you could play a commander that provides you with a mana advantage like Hinata, Baral, or Urza, Lord Protector. There's also commanders that provide you with some kind of passive advantage for casting your spells like Talrand, who makes up for the cards you lose when you interact by giving you some kind of payoff. Some of the most fun kinds of commanders are those that give you a direction to build around. Yorion, for example, encourages you to slant your deck toward cards with sweet enters the battlefield effects. Raf, Capuchin, Ship's Mage, or Joyra, Weatherlight Captain, ask you to use historic spells for your interaction. Hilda of the Icy Crown points you toward tap-down effects for your opponent's creatures rather than hard removal, a great way to control the board that's less likely to turn the table against you. But what about the rest of your deck? Well, to some extent, the cards in your 99 will be dictated by the commander you choose. Magma Opus, for example, is a slam dunk inclusion in a Hinata deck, but most other commanders won't want it. Raf Capuchin loves historic-based interaction that it can cast at instant speed like Elspeth Conquers Death and Larry Niven's Disc, but those cards won't be much use to a Hilda deck. As a general rule, though, you'll want to prioritize interactions that are one or more of the following traits: efficient mana cost, replace themselves, highly flexible, instant speed, and or interact with multiple things at once. The more of these traits any given card has, the better off you'll be. In a more traditional, proactive deck, the most important traits are efficiency and instant speed. These things matter in a control deck as well, but since interacting is a more primary game plan, you'll want to pay attention to the other three traits too. Let's take a look at a couple pairs of commonly played interaction spells and decide which is the stronger card in the context of a control deck. Counterspell versus Arcane Denial. Control players in 1v1 formats are generally loath to give their opponents cards for free, but in Commander, a card like Arcane Denial is actually way more effective for interacting than Counterspell. You draw a card while 1/3 of your opponents draw two. That means for your one card drawn, your opponents have drawn an average of 2/3 of a card. That's not to say you shouldn't run Counterspell in addition to Denial, but Denial is the stronger 2-mana counter, and if you have the option to cast one or the other, you should almost always cast the Denial first. Assassin's Trophy versus Windgrace's Judgment. Assassin's Trophy is certainly a more mana-efficient way to remove a permanent than Windgrace's Judgment, which is why Trophy sees a lot more play than Judgment. But for a control deck, Windgrace's Judgment will often be more valuable, since it destroys 3 things for a single card rather than just one. Judgment is better for removing 3 problematic but not game-ending threats, whereas Trophy is better used only for the absolute most threatening permanents on the battlefield. Nature's Claim versus Heliod's Intervention. Nature's Claim is the epitome of efficiency. 1 mana to destroy any artifact or enchantment for the small cost of giving an opponent some life. It's fantastic. But for control decks, Heliod's Intervention is better. It destroys more things for a single card and can double as a massive life gain spell to keep you in the game longer. As for card advantage, well, a similar philosophy applies. The absolute best source of card advantage in Commander is of course Rhystic Study, but there are other less annoying options for keeping your hands stocked. The goal is to accrue as many cards as you can for the cost of a single card. I know, it doesn't sound like rocket science, but stick with me for a moment. Which is the better card advantage spell? Factor Fiction or Archmage Emeritus? Both have pros and cons, but at the end of the day, Archmage Emeritus is likely to draw you more cards over the course of the game than Factor Fiction, both for the same mana investment. The goal is to set up a game state where your hand remains full of cards without having to spend resources to get them. If your commander does this for you, this is less of a concern, but if you don't get that source of card advantage from your commander, you'll need to find room for it in your 99. Maybe you attach a a Robe of the Archmagi to an evasive wizard to draw extra cards in each of your combat steps. Maybe you get a Nazihal, Primal Tide, into play and let it passively draw cards for you. Whatever you choose, you'll probably want multiple sources of card advantage. Commander is a singleton format after all. You also need a way to boost your mana output. Interacting with your opponents doesn't just cost you cards, it also costs you mana. Green-based control decks generally try to put a Seedborn Muse into play so that they can interact with each player on those players' turns. But even decks without green mana can find workarounds for this. If your deck has a lot of artifact mana, for example, you might consider including an Unwinding Clock to accomplish a similar effect to Seedborn Muse. Alternatively, you can use cost reduction effects or spells that untap your lands, like Rewind and Snap, to give you a virtual mana boost. The last thing you need is a Serra Angel. Not literal Serra Angel, but rather a way to win the game. Unlike 1v1 formats, demoralizing your opponent into submission with interaction and card advantage is generally not a viable win con in Commander. Some control decks win with commander damage, others by assembling a board full of tokens. Others set up some kind of inevitability engine, such as looping Seasons Past, or repeatedly copying Eternal Witness with Sublime Epiphany, or flickering it repeatedly with Ephemerate to get back a counter spell. Still, others build toward a true infinite win combo of some kind. The secret is you can kind of win however you want. You just have to win within a reasonable enough time that the other players want to invite you back again. But building an effective control deck for Commander is only half the battle. You also need to pilot it well. Part 3. Piloting your deck. You can't just counter every spell that goes on the stack. Not only will that make you unpopular at the table, but it won't even help you win the game. Instead, focus your interaction on the following kinds of cards that your opponents play. Cards that interact with your board or threaten your development in some way. Cards that are way more powerful than what anyone else at the table has been able to do yet, such as a turn 1 Soul Ring. Cards that are accruing far more advantage than the rest of the board can keep up with. Cards that you can interact with to gain goodwill from other opponents. For example, I'll remove that big creature attacking you so that you and I are on good terms for the next few turns. And of course, cards that will win outright on the spot if unanswered. The more you can let other players do their thing, not only will the other players have more fun, but you will have less of a target on your head while you try to set up your engine and sculpt your hand for your inevitable victory push. Think of it like this. 1v1 control players have a fondness for a period of the game known as garbage time. That is, the time when you have complete control over the game, but you haven't technically won yet. In garbage time, you generally don't interact with the cards your opponents play unless those cards stand a chance of killing you. In Commander, you can kind of treat the whole game like it's garbage time. You let your opponents freely enact their game plan insofar as that plan isn't threatening to kill you. Meanwhile, you draw cards, you set up your engine, and you pick and choose only the most important targets to interact with while you work towards your end goal. Most importantly, pay attention to how the cards you play in a game are viewed by the other players at the table. Does everyone groan when you play a certain card? Do you notice your deck often reaches a point where no one at the table looks like they are enthusiastic about the game anymore? How do people react when you pull out your favorite control commander? Commander is a format where having fun is the most important thing. That doesn't mean you can't bring a control deck to Commander Night. It just means you need to be mindful of what kind of games your control deck creates and how the rest of the table feels about those games. After all, your goal shouldn't be to just play Control and Commander once. You want to be able to play Control and Commander again and again, and that means playing Control and Commander in such a way that your friends and opponents invite you back for another game. I hope very much this Commander lesson has been of some help to you. What type of Commander strategy or lesson would you like to see on Tolarian Tutor next? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks again to Boot.dev, an online learning tool that will teach you how to code in Python and Go programming languages via a fun and interactive online RPG. It's like learning a game, only instead of memorizing Pokemon or Magic cards, you're learning programming. The best part? The creators of Boot.dev believe coding shouldn't be locked behind a paywall, so all of the content is free to read and watch in guest mode. A paid membership just unlocks interactivity and the game that goes with it. So click the link in this video's description box and use my code Tolarian to get 25% off of your first payment for Boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or even your first year, depending on the subscription you choose. Thank you, Boot.dev, for sponsoring this video.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Players learn Magic the Gathering.
I'm Paul from Team APS. I'm playing the Warhammer Precon.
I'm Alec. I'm playing Dog Meat.
I am Larry from Team APS, Davros, the Dalek creator.
The precon I selected is Samwise Gamgee. I have created upgrade packets for you.
Cast Supply Llama.
Is that a Fortnite llama?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Wait,
alliance.
did we make an alliance or did you? He just shakes
People
that.
with
He
dog
didn't even
or-
negotiate.
It's very vanilla.
I've been described as very vanilla.
And we are going to start my villain phase.
Let me get this straight. Lose a card.
Yes.
Or you gain a card.
It's a villainous choice. I'm sorry. Happen again.
Yeah, there's some
Is
of the
that
upgrades.
Ash?
Wait, I think I know this